Hi, welcome to Culturally Determined on Blogging His TV. My name is Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and I'll be your host today for a conversation with Joe Bernstein. Joe, could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Joe Bernstein. I'm a senior reporter at BuzzFeed News. I've been on sabbatical for the past year doing a Nieman Fellowship, which is a journalism fellowship at Harvard. And the reason I'm on the show today is while I was doing the Nieman, I sort of worked on this project about disinformation, discourse around disinformation in the news, and in academia, sort of over the past 4 years of the Trump years that just ran in Harper's as a story there.
Yeah, so I am holding up, it's the cover story in the September issue of Harper's. The shiny cover has some reflection there. And sorry for getting the Stein wrong on your name. I'm sure that happens often. So
members of the tribe are allowed to get it
wrong. So thanks for taking the time to come on. So this is a big piece that lots of people were talking about, and I found it very interesting. There are parts I agreed with, parts I disagreed with. I'm sure you've gotten a lot of pushback because you're taking a very counter-narrative perspective. And I mean, would it be an exaggeration to say that you think the panic or outrage, uproar about disinformation/misinformation/ fake news is way overblown and we're getting this whole thing wrong?
No, I wouldn't say that. And I also don't want to call it a moral panic or any of your sort of more Greenwaldian, Taibbian, sort of Zed Jalanian. Not that those people don't have contributions to make. So
you're not parlaying this into a Substack immediately, and
I'm not, and I'm sorry to disappoint those who hope that I will. My point is not that there is not propaganda and bad and dangerous content on social platforms. Let no one put those words in my mouth. My point is that there is a narrative around content on the internet right now that I think has over-egged the pudding, has over-torqued itself a little bit. And I wrote this piece because I think there's a lack of coherence to it that I think ultimately needed to be brought to the fore, if only to strengthen arguments, against the platforms. And I think when you have a kind of a dominant critique of the kind that this one is, the longer the sort of, I think, what I consider good faith and reasonable criticisms of it go unaddressed, I think ultimately the weaker that line of criticism is. So that's why I wrote the piece.
Okay. So one argument you make that was counterintuitive or was at least new to me, but does make sense, is that in a way the people who are concerned about online disinformation and are trying to combat it are largely unintentionally playing into the hands of Mark Zuckerberg and other Silicon Valley titans, because they are sort of implicitly saying that these platforms are very efficient ways to change people's minds or convince people of things. And the platforms almost entirely make their money through advertising. And if there's the idea out there that Facebook is the place you go if you need to change someone's mind, that ultimately helps Mark Zuckerberg's bottom line.
Right. I mean, you stated the argument very succinctly. What got me thinking along these lines is actually there's a phrase that's used to describe, sort of all the media we come in contact with, the information ecosystem. And so people talk about Facebook and YouTube, Twitter as polluters. There's like a pollution model. And so I started thinking quite literally about the energy industry and the tobacco industry and these like literal polluters. And I started thinking about like how intensely and how long they fought like the science that they were polluting. And then I thought sort of how quickly actually the tech industry basically took on board the criticism that their content is too powerful or is too effective at changing people's minds, and how quickly they attempted to take on board their critics through partnerships and things like that. And so I started wondering why it would be more beneficial to them to incorporate the critics than to fight them on their primary claim. And then I started wondering if their primary claim is actually so different from the actual thing that makes these platforms money. So is that a little convoluted? Maybe, but I do think it's part of a general worldview that has really sprung up fast, that what people see on the internet is like deterministically, is mechanically deterministic. And I think it's worth, pushing back against that a little bit, wondering about the research, wondering about the implications, and wondering about the politics of that claim.
Right. And so your analysis is sort of a cui bono, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or in some way, it's like maybe we could call it like vulgar Marxist, like just follow the money sort of thing. Like, why? That's a good analogy, I think, that, cigarette companies, fought and funded studies and had their own public campaigns for decades trying to disprove the link between cigarettes and cancer. And it took, massive lawsuits and like a cultural change to get them to capitulate. And I think Zuckerberg in like late 2016 said something like, "Oh, I don't believe that Facebook played a role in the election." Like within a year, he was admitting that Facebook did play a role and so forth. So part of that could be sort of the sort of like regulatory capture argument, I guess, of being like, we yes, we know there's a problem, but let's all work together to solve it, instead of having some sort of draconian crackdown or something. But then, the idea that, Facebook, like Facebook really can change minds is, like I said before, is implicit in the critique. And so part of your piece is in some ways kind of like a argument against the effectiveness of advertising and, the persuasion industry in general. Do you want to talk about that?
I mean, when I started thinking about this, I quite naturally started thinking about the history of persuasion. I started thinking about the kind of highest profile kinds of mis and disinformation, which are political ads. There's not a ton of literature on the efficacy of online political ads, but it's certainly not like only in one direction, saying that they're super effective. There's a, and I talk about this in the piece, and people can look that up if they want, but there's research that basically shows that people actually don't share fake news all that much. These sort of fake news ad buys compared to like a local television ad, have a minute effect on vote share. So what I wanted to do there was just sort of point to the fact that the scholarship itself, the quantitative scholarship, is unsettled. And then there's a larger cultural history of the ad industry trying to cultivate behavioral science to give itself a kind of veneer of quantitative sophistication that would essentially be a way of selling their own product, which is ad space. And so the more persuasive Facebook, YouTube, Twitter appear to be through whatever smorgasbord of analytics and fancy graphics, the more the ad buyer feels that they've spent their money well, and that they've, hit their targets. But there's actually, there's a history of research on advertising, which is quite skeptical. There's a wonderful relatively new book that I talk about at length in this piece by Tim Wong, who's now the general counsel at Substack, which is essentially about the many sort of weak pillars of faith of the online ad industry, which is like far beyond, like it's not beyond criticism. And in fact, Facebook itself has, is engaged in litigation about overstating the reach and efficacy of its ads. And so if you're willing to take that criticism on board, you have to at least wonder about the efficacy of mis and disinformative advertisements.
Right. So, the idea that the idea that, maybe advertising itself is sort of a scam and doesn't really work, like that's been out there for a while. And I guess sort of everyone thinks like, well, advertising must work on some people, but not on me. Like I can see through it. Coca-Cola is trying to seem cool. Like I'm smarter than that. That's sort of the, right thinking person's idea, maybe. But then maybe the whole thing has been sort of a sham from the beginning. Like advertising is, not, I mean, maybe one thing is sort of like people who are already going to purchase a product will see the ad and then they feel a little bit better about it, or maybe they're more slightly more likely to do it. But you're said, maybe you're not really changing minds, but okay. But then, so with before the internet, if someone placed an ad on television or in a newspaper or magazine, there was no real way to, aside from like looking at sales going up or down, or like doing a poll of like awareness of the brand or message or something.
Right.
Like there wasn't a real way to say this worked or this didn't work. Right. And then supposedly with online ads,
right,
the click through, and that could, that seems to be a piece of evidence. It could be manipulated, and trying to figure out, if anyone is actually clicking on these things. Like it's more of an empirical thing, even if it can be scammed in some ways.
I would really point people to this book, which kind of blew my mind. That the whole industry is beset by fraud, including click-through rates. More sort of maybe more to my point. It's interesting what you said about people think, well, all these suckers are convinced by ads, except for me.
Right.
Think about the way people talk about disinformation. It's like all these sheep are convinced by what they see on Facebook, but not me. Like I know that that's bullshit. It's interesting, like just when you talk about it that way, that these two discussions really kind of do parallel each other. Also, far be it from me to claim that like ads don't work at all, or, information on the internet doesn't work at all, just to say, like, I think we need to inject some skepticism into this discussion. And perhaps the political atmosphere of the past, 5-6 years has made it difficult.
Right. And so, like 40 years ago, if a big, or maybe in like Mad Men era or something, if a big company did an ad campaign in, with full page ads in magazines and newspapers, then, the CEO or director of marketing or whatever would like see them. And if they look good, he would be happy. And then if sales increase 5%, the natural conclusion would be this played some role.
Right.
And then if sales went down, maybe they think, well, the ads didn't work, or the ads are bad, hire a new ad firm. I guess I sort of share a skepticism about ads. I mean, especially, you have ads for Coca-Cola or something, or McDonald's. Then you have ads for maybe like a new product or new thing. And then you have political ads, which are different and are much more about, I don't know. I mean, it's not parallel exactly to say trying to convince someone to buy a Pepsi versus convince someone to vote or not vote. It probably, I have been skeptical about the efficacy of political ads in general for a long time, because, who is like, first of all, I mean, in 2020, who was watching this shit? Maybe because people are stuck at home more, they were watching more TV, but, people tune out advertising in general.
Yeah.
You see the ad 12 times, you're probably sick of it. I don't know. And then I remember my grandfather, who, passed away like 27 years ago. He used to, whenever the commercials came on TV, he would mute it. He would hold the clicker by him at all times. And when ads came on, he would just mute it. And so, and he was born in like 1915 or something. So, right. So he was sick of that shit, a long time ago.
Right. So like, it's interesting you bring that up. And also media effects are not that well understood. There was a paper, this might seem unrelated, but there was a paper that was published yesterday that I got a kick out of. I think an economist at the University of Toronto figured out the effect of a radio listener in the 1930s listening to Father Coughlin, the sort of rabidly anti-communist, anti-Semitic priest in Detroit with the, Little Flower Church. The effect of a listener listening to that program on FDR's vote share. And he just came out with this study 80 years later. And radio, let's say, is a significantly simpler thing to study than social media.
And more ubiquitous as in terms of
ubiquitous
media share.
Right.
In the 30s, whatever.
And so again, what I wanted to stress in this piece, and maybe it didn't come through strongly enough, it's just take a breath, humility, massive changes happening. There's a lot of people with economic interests here. Let's think about what they want to sell. Let's think about what the kind of storytelling that's happening is. And then let's think about what, how we want to critique these companies, which deserve critique. Absolutely. No question.
Yeah. It's definitely not a defense of Silicon Valley. It's more or it's possibly even a stronger damnation of them if they're supposedly doing the right thing in the public interest or something, but really they're ultimately benefiting.
Right. And some people picked up on this, and I appreciate it. It's maybe a stronger criticism of them than your content is bad is your products are worthless. And wow, I don't know, but that's just me.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of different places we go. I mean, I saw just a couple weeks ago, Twitter released a quarterly earnings report, and it was something maybe I even have I'm off by 10 times or something. It was something like revenue 1 billion, and their total spending 1.06 billion for a profit of 30 million or something. So this raised a lot of questions. One, how are they making $1 billion on Twitter ads, which are total garbage? Who is possibly click on these things?
Right.
There's probably more people clicking on Twitter ads by accident because their thumb slipped than see something and clicks it and it ends up making a purchase or something.
Big, but Aryeh, huge part of the Wong book is just how much of ad click-throughs are literal fat finger, especially on mobile. It's like a not insignificant percentage are your thumb is they design the buttons so that your thumb is too big to not click on them.
Okay. Yes. I mean, another question, which is not maybe within the ambit of this, is how is Twitter possibly spending $1 billion when the product is so shitty? Right. Yeah. So where's this money go? Is this being funneled into offshore accounts, in Burma where, Jack is going to go become a monk or something. But okay. So how is it, online ads, people are generally annoyed by them even more than, my grandfather muting the TV in 1990. Mm-hmm. And people run ad blockers. Or you're just they're total garbage. There's this, chum is sort of the term of art. Mm-hmm. These things like taboola and, a photo of a actor from Hee Haw. It's you won't believe how he died. And right. It's just total garbage crap.
Look who got fat.
Yeah, you won't believe what they look like now. This is or it's just I have a sick fascination with this stuff, and if I were a real journalist, I would look into how it's being made and how they write the things, because sometimes it's a sort of strange, poetry to the things. Are robots writing these things? Is it people in Southeast Asia? It's so confusing to me. But
it's a real beauty.
So there's all this crap. Okay, but then unless Twitter is scamming the SEC, they actually did collect $1 billion plus from companies through their ads, and are the companies themselves run by morons and they don't even understand what's happening? They're being swindled too. I mean, you mentioned this thing about how display ads on websites look good in PowerPoint presentations. When the ad firm is doing their annual presentation to the board or something, and so maybe that's the effect is there, not in what it actually accomplishes in the real world. But okay, any response to that ramble?
Well, I don't think an ad has to be. I mean, part of the idea of this piece is that a piece of content like accepts so many different needs. There are political needs, there are economic needs, there are structural needs, like that whether it's a Trump ad or an ad for like a taboo, like a chum box, and like there's a marketing budget, and like the marketing budget gets spent, and like presumably that company makes money, whether it's based on fraud or whatever the hell. And so like to that extent, this little piece of content, and I'm rambling now, but it's a little building block for this world of persuasion that we're all convinced exists. Not to sound too like, freshman year dorm room stoned or whatever, but like it does require it requires some acts of faith if you want to be generous. It requires it requires things that can't be quantified. It requires like assuming that certain, that brains are moved by seeing content. And, maybe that's like, maybe, we both work in the media. Maybe we don't want to hear that.
No. Yeah.
But my broader point is not that people can't be convinced. It's that the idea that exposure to any one piece of content, that you can isolate that and say that's why this person is this way, voted this way, smeared their shit around the Capitol, took horse medication to treat a highly transmissible respiratory virus. I think that's too far. I just think it is. And I think the discussion has moved too far in that direction.
Okay. Yeah. And, on the sort of the point of like, why do we consume content and does it change our minds? I was an editor at Blogging Hedge, which in its original form was like left, right, civil conversation. And so I consumed like, hundreds or thousands of hours of content of people talking about things that I didn't know about, or I disagreed with them or something. And it's like, so I consumed way more like conservatives and libertarians talking than the average, person who has my politics. And like, I wasn't really convinced of that much. It's more like, often just giving new information just sort of like reinforces the beliefs you had. And I came to sort of see it by the end as more like, we're not like changing minds. It's more like, people watching sports and they just enjoy learning about these things or paying attention to them, but it's not like, like an exercise in really changing minds or bringing the light, the light of the gospel to people.
Or they want to make their argument stronger. That's a classic thing is a guy goes on YouTube because he wants to find out why like his argument with the creationist in his class, why he's losing that argument and how to win it, or whatever, So, I don't think that I don't have like a unified theory of persuasion. And I think that people who want to sell you one in this unbelievably unsettled era in media and politics are kind of full of shit.
Okay. So one sort of critique I would have of the piece is that, you note accurately that all these terms are all poorly defined, and what we call disinformation or misinformation or fake news, these are not settled concepts. So like in my original understanding of fake news from like 2016 was a Facebook post saying the Pope has endorsed Donald Trump. So that was not true. And then I think the investigation revealed that there was like some teenagers in Macedonia or something who are running these fake news sites where they were putting stuff just to get like clicks from credulous Americans, and they were like making money on ads or something, and somehow this was enough to make their effort worth it. So that was original fake news. Trump appropriated the term such that anything he didn't like became fake news. So now if you're a conservative or a MAGA person, all news is fake news, and if I don't like something, then that's fake news. So then you have like a Macedonian scam artist, you have an American scam artist, former President Donald Trump. You have, I think the story has been told again on this platform, but Nikita Petrov, who is a behind the scenes person at Blogging Heads, lives in Russia, and he met at a party. And this story, he told it to me years ago, so I may have some details wrong. He met at the party someone who worked at the Internet Research Association, or whatever that group was, that was tasked by the Russian government to provide fake news to sway the 2016 election. And the guy was telling him, what he had done that day. And the thing he had done was he was in charge of a group that was appealing to Texans, and he had posted a photo of a juicy steak, and it had gotten like 30 likes. And his boss was happy that had happened. So the vaunted disinformation campaign run by Putin was maybe just nonsense anyway, and sort of like make work. And there's even I forget, of course, don't remember the word. There's some term in Russian that's like a make work project that the government sets up just to give people employment for a while, and it never actually produces anything. Like, that is such a part of Russian culture that there's a specific term for it.
Yeah.
That may be what this was. Okay, so then you had, so you have people who are possibly trying to influence some national politics of their country or another country, and are manipulating people online through, or trying to, or pretending to be something. Or someone in some 20-something in Moscow is running a Texas group for Texas on Facebook. So there's that. And then you have sort of like the way that the internet allows groups of people who share a similar belief that maybe the larger society doesn't share, come together and talk to each other and reinforce their ideas and exchange ideas and so forth. And so things you referenced before, QAnon, January 6th, and the recent craze for ivermectin are fall in that latter group. And so no one, I don't think, and I tweet about this, like, what's weird about the ivermectin stuff and the fact that conservative influencers are promoting it is I don't think they actually have a monetary share in selling ivermectin. Usually if conservative influencers are selling pills, it's because they get a cut of the pills. And, so like Ben Shapiro and Alex Jones both sell nootropic, brain pills. So that's a long-standing scam on the right. These people, the ivermectin people, became convinced somehow, and they are working together. And 30 years ago, these people wouldn't have been able to find each other except down at the feed store where they were all buying their horse paste. So this is something different. This isn't like there's no hit, as far as we know right now. There's no hidden hand from the ivermectin industry that is trying to do this. There's weirdo freaks like Bret Weinstein or Weinstein who is trying to convince people that ivermectin is better for you than the COVID vaccine, and I don't know why he believes that. He's a weird freak. But so how does that fit in? And is that disinformation? Is that mass psychosis? How do you see it?
There's a couple of things. First of all, it's bullshit information. It's bad information. Snake oil salesmen have had a place in American society for a long time. Yes, they can organize and activate people in a way that they probably couldn't in the past. I would say some of that is simply a function of the internet. It brings people together. And one of the criticisms of my piece was that it too much is an argument for the internet as mirror argument, which is the internet merely reflects what already exists in society. I think that goes too far. I don't agree with that. And
I say maybe like a funhouse mirror. I don't know if anyone has used that metaphor, but it takes things I think latent in society or human psychology, human behavior, and turns up the volume on certain ones like emotionality or
and I think those things are all plausible and plausibly true. I don't think that they have that much to do with like a lot of the way the disinformation sort of critique was formulated in the Trump years. And also, we don't have to, ivermectin or like real COVID, like lies about COVID are like a case where it's pretty easy to say these are lies, they harm people, like let's get rid of them. What I will say is there was a point in time not very long ago where to even post on Facebook that COVID potentially was a lab accident from a lab in China was verboten. It was taken down. And that literally changed because of a finding by the American intelligence agencies. And so to the extent that official knowledge is not there, like, I don't really think it should be the job of the media and academia to be like ahead of the FDA or like, the CDC in telling Facebook what is and isn't mis or disinformation. Like, that to me is not good. And, I think we can be smart enough and subtle enough to hold in our heads like crazy horse syringe people, and also people who really want to go too far in like making certain kinds of information completely off limits, in ways that are like obvious, like in ways that don't even take a year to be exposed as like ridiculous, and ridiculously censorious.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned before on this show that the problem of online comment moderation is fault is even though it seems like a minor one, is explains a lot of issues that are live debates today. And Trump getting kicked off of Twitter was one example of online moderation finally happening. And so I mean, it's one thing if a bunch of Americans somehow believe that the Pope endorsed Donald Trump. It's another if a bunch of Americans believe something about a highly communicable disease that they can spread, to strangers or their loved ones.
Yeah.
That isn't true. So, and then this idea that like it's impossible for the platforms to really do any sort of moderation about statements of fact, because I mean, even if you cut out all the non-English speaking, like, what are they? Almost every tweet is total garbage to begin with. They can't take that down.
Right, but as I say in the piece, there like is no definition of disinformation that will both satisfy like a basic epistemological test of coherence and will also be useful for the platforms. It just won't. It can't exist. And so, like at a certain point, you have to accept that these decisions are, to some degree, judgment calls or political. And we have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
The platforms do have that power. And
everyone ends up hating the mods. And the moderator, someone who previously was a comment moderator on the Plugins website, you never make everyone happy, and you don't have the authority of a Supreme Court judge. So people are like, who the hell are you to say that this crossed the line? And right. There's no, the fact that it's like some anonymous group of the Twitter content team or something is making it, and who the hell are they? Right. We don't know. So,
but it's so funny because you bring this up, and then it's like, well, think about the Facebook like content Supreme Court. Like, what is that if not like a beleaguered mods like desperate scheme to like deflect blame a little bit? So I think there's some truth to that. And I mean, do you mean like the Council of Elders that they've assembled of like deep thinkers who are pondering these things? Yeah, they're kicking the can up the road. I think it is sort of like, if I ever got around to writing this piece, at the end it would be like, it's an insoluble problem, and you can't do it in a way that will make everyone happy. That's inherent in it. So, I mean, if people, and you talk a little bit about like, we're maybe just seeing more evidence of the sort of things that were out there already more in the audience than in the, the content producers. And so, there have always been people who had strange beliefs. Yes. And, but maybe the average, the average member of the reading public who subscribes to Harper's didn't have contact with these type of people. And how would they, 40 years ago, how would they make their weird beliefs known? There was, they could have a zine or something, or they could stand on the street corner and yell, and that would make them a crazy person. So, except there have been like, there's a great book I read, which is, I sort of obliquely talk about in the piece. It's by a libertarian historian named Paul Matzko. It's called The Radio Right. It's about basically the precursor to right-wing talk radio, which were sort of anti-communist radio preachers in the 1960s, who Kennedy basically sicked the FEC on. but they had a huge listenership, just like the average like suburbanite who like, watched NBC News after work had no idea that they existed. They just like those two worlds didn't intersect. But like Kennedy was really worried about them as an electoral for like as affecting politics. So I do think, people have responded a lot to that like suggestion in my piece that like maybe we're just seeing a segment of the public that like we're not used to seeing. And I don't want to push that too far, but at the same time, like that is a related discussion to the discussion in the media about underrepresentation of, non-white people, non-men, like the people who gatekeepers have kept out, are both people who, like really deserve to be, in the media and in the knowledge producing industries, and also people who have nothing but like loathing for democracy. And so like when you change the gates, when you change the way they work, lots of things get it. Lots of different kinds of things get in. Some of what you want, some things you do want, some things you don't. So that's sort of my way of saying there's good and bad.
Yeah, I mean, I took like a media 101 class in high school, and like gatekeeping is one of the chapter one of about the media. Gatekeeping would be one of the things it would list, and like so it would have said the editors decide what counts as news and what doesn't, and what voices are heard and which ones aren't, and if the media doesn't cover it, then it's hard for that to get out. So that paradigm, like the internet has shattered that paradigm. I mean, it's still, if you think back to like how the Hunter Biden laptop story played out, there was still an attempt by the media to sort of, including this new and social media, to sort of stamp out a story that they didn't want spread, and it sort of, it worked to the extent that, unless you are really in the swamps, that you don't care about Hunter Biden's laptop anymore, and of course Joe Biden was elected, so it still sort of works to that extent, but yeah, any kook can, host a podcast these days, and the gatekeeping is almost totally eliminated. But at the same time, like there are people, like extremely noxious figures, eventually do get kicked off of larger platforms, like Alex Jones, who was kicked off of YouTube and Facebook, etc. And former President Donald Trump kicked off of Twitter forever.
Fringe figures such as the president.
Yeah, and it's the Trump aspect to all of this just makes it all like crazier and stupider. Yes. And like if the gatekeepers still existed, then Trump never would have become the nominee. Like they would have been able to put a stop to him, and the fact that he rose is a sign of gatekeeper weakness and the way he sort of worked around the system. What do you think of people like Bret Weinstein, and how should YouTube? He's saying things about the pandemic that seem blatantly false to me. Of course, I'm not a scientist, but it doesn't make any sense to me why a anti-parasite drug would be better for a virus than a vaccine. And if he keeps on going on this the way he's going currently, it seems like he'll probably be kicked off of like YouTube and Patreon and Twitter maybe. How should the new media treat a figure like this? Like if it was 30 years ago, Bret Weinstein would not have an outlet aside from like ham radio or zine to get his views out there, even if he was still a professor at Evergreen University. Like, what do you like? He would just be like a local crank. What a family that family, huh? Yeah, there are some interesting people.
So it's a complicated question. There's like a libertarian argument, which is that if the new media, which I guess by which you mean what, like digital media and like
I guess I mean more like I guess it's I'm thinking more of the platforms than
the platforms are free to formulate their own policies, right? They can say if you promote if you promote things as cures for COVID that don't cure COVID or don't, the platforms can do whatever the hell they want. They're protected in terms of content. And as a person who believes in like the rationality of science and like following public health, like I think they should. I just don't think that they are able to come up with a blanket definition of bad information that is apolitical and that is sort of coherent as a way of thinking about how people change their minds when exposed to media. And that's the argument of my piece. The argument of my piece is certainly not you should be able to go and make money off of quack cures on Facebook if you want. I mean, I do think that the kind of people who are attracted to those messages are already attracted to quack cures and are going to try quack cures. That's my personal belief about the power of messaging. But I certainly don't think Facebook or Twitter or YouTube have any obligation to give these people a platform. My broader point is about the worldview that says these platforms are what make people want quack cures in the first place, which I just don't think is accurate.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, there'll be some sort of postmortem, no pun intended, on how it became the case that ivermectin became this obsession of at least some group of Americans. And I don't know, there's people who on Twitter who have been like sort of lurking in some of these private Facebook groups and posting the screenshots and of people talking about ivermectin and what the doses should be. And some of them are very, very disturbing and, post like how much ivermectin for a 10-year-old. And you're just like, okay, this person is in another reality. If Facebook didn't exist, probably their life would be better. But, so it just seems bad. I mean, overall. And yeah, I agree that, 50 years ago, there were plenty of people who thought that, chlorine in the water or something was affecting their brains, and that was long before the internet. But yeah, there is something. I mean, like I sort of buy your case. Basically, I sort of buy your case from about the like top down aspect of it, but the bottom up and the crazies finding each other, and like, I mean, QAnon was sort of a top down thing, but it was really also a sort of a group project of coming up with ideas, and ones would rise to the top. And
how much have you heard about QAnon recently?
Well, it depends who you follow on Twitter. I mean, the main guy who seems to, this father and son duo, the Watkins boys, they seem to have sort of gone off it, but maybe the son is still involved. Yeah. And there's, if what happened on January 6th didn't convince people who were into QAnon or QAnon curious that like this wasn't true, then these are the type of people who you could fool with anything. So
right. Yes. I mean, if you think, okay, maybe QAnon is not what it was, 6 months ago, I would be more worried about, what's happening at these school board meetings across America. And these are questions about democratic participation that like are live, and that like the internet makes more complicated. But again, I don't think that, like Facebook ads, shitty content on Facebook are like the driving factor in like the insane American like desire for chaos and destruction.
So you have a paragraph in the piece where you talk about pre-propaganda, which is sort of like maybe the base conditions or something. Yeah. And you have a list of quotes, including, the paranoid style, the indigenous American berserk, which is a Philip Roth reference, which I appreciated. And so this was a crazy country long before the internet came along. And it will, if the internet blinked out of existence, like plenty of crazy shit would keep on going. But it's sort of like, okay, if you can't say Facebook and Twitter are to blame for everything, but like how much are they making the problem worse? And but all these negative byproducts, like just destroying the media industry that apparently relied on advertising that never really worked to begin with.
So yes, but what I also want to point attention to in this piece was who are the people who most want to blame the internet, for Facebook, social platforms and bad content for negative outcomes. who has that vested interest. And that's sort of, when I talk in the piece about, not just this sort of political hucksters, this sort of Brad Parscale, Cambridge Analytica types, but also, when, not to blame things on the neoliberals, but it is certainly in the kind of centrist neoliberal interest to blame an outside kind of novel, standardizable force for what happened in 2015 and 2016. It's much easier to blame that than, sort of the policy failures and sort of their own failures of like political imagination and communication. So, I wanted to call attention to that in the piece as well. So,
yeah, I mean, if I wrote the report on the rise of Donald Trump and listing the culprits in order, I would put reality television at the top, and that predates social media and was largely separate from it for a long time. Let me see if there's so just a couple things that so right after I read the piece, but I think the same day as I do, I checked the New York Times homepage, and there was a big banner ad on top, and it was for the Peacock, which is NBC's streaming service, but it was the Spanish version, and it said Peacock Oz streaming gratis, subscribete ahora, and was listing 3 Spanish shows. So there's probably no website that actually, maybe besides Google, that knows more about me than the New York Times website. I'm a subscriber. They have my credit card information. They know what articles I read. And yet somehow they were giving me a Spanish, I don't speak Spanish, they were giving me a Spanish language ad across the top. So in that respect, I was like, okay, yeah, a lot of this is just total bullshit crap. And the ads you see don't really know anything about you and don't really seem to have any real effect, and that's the vaunted New York Times. And then a day or two later, I saw on Twitter that there was something trending called COVID-22, and so of course I didn't know what that was, so I clicked on it, and the top tweet was from something called Insider Paper, at the Insider Paper. They said, "Alert: new super variant named COVID-22 could be more dangerous than Delta strain. Expert warned." I was like, "Well, what is this?" And this had 1.1 thousand retweets, 571 likes. When I saw it 54 minutes after it was tweeted, I clicked on it. I ended up at a strange website called Insider Paper that seemed to just be stealing content from, European newspapers. Yeah. It was written in a sort of way that seemed like it was maybe translated into another language, translated back. Right. And because I had some spare time, I was like, what the hell is this? Is this like the Macedonian teens? They're back at it again. It basically looks like a real website. It has bylines. I tried to figure out if the person who wrote this article supposedly, attributed to writing this article exists. It doesn't seem like they exist, but there was a phone number. And so I put on my, reporter's hat, which I'm not a real reporter. And the phone number was area code 518, which is upstate New York. And so I called and was just like, what's going to happen? And someone answered with an accent I couldn't really understand. I said, is this Insider Paper? And they said, yes. And I said, where are you located? And they said, in Australia. And I asked them 1 or 2 more questions, and they were like, are you for real? And I was like, yeah, I host a podcast. I was just interested in this. And so, basically, so the story was like, there was some real event that happened. Some researcher in Germany said like, there's a possible strain out there that could be even worse. And he was saying, the first variant was COVID-20, then COVID-21, and then he would call this one COVID-22. Right. So and then COVID-22 went viral because people were just joking about it being like COVID-22, I wasn't over COVID-21 or whatever. Right. And then this particular tweet, for whatever reason, the algorithm made it the most popular thing. So it was retweeted over 1,000 times. And even though Insider Paper has like 75,000 followers, are they real humans? Who even knows?
I mean, what you're describing is garbage. You're describing an internet ouroboros, garbage thing. Whether that's like a massive threat to democracy on the scale of like, income inequality or like, racist voter suppression, we don't have to rank order these things, but like that is a truly stupid and annoying and like potentially harmful thing. But I don't know that it's like indicative of like a massive, like overarching, like like imminent threat to like our way of life.
Okay, I mean, so I always wonder, like, is there anyone who is like unpersuaded of anything who's on Twitter? Because
right,
like the unpersuadable people are like living their lives out there and attending their children's T-ball games and stuff. But like, you can just imagine, someone is like glancing at Twitter, they see COVID-22, they're like, oh God, COVID-22, what's happening? It's coming, like it's even worse. And like, so their day, basically, this is not a instance of a giant threat to democracy, but like their day has been made worse by this like little piece of content that the algorithm has promoted. And someone in Australia possibly is running this thing. Who knows why? I usually, like I said, I run an ad blocker. I looked at it in a private window, so the ad blocker was off. The ads that were running were sort of the same ones I would see in other places, of like that high quality gray face mask that is like supposed to be the best that you see those ads for everywhere. So it wasn't like Chum and trying to get me to. It was like a total scam, like it's trying to get my credit card information or something. So I just throw up my hands and like, this is all, I don't even know. So I sort of agree that, this is not climate change equivalent or something, but like it's contributing to making all of our lives worse.
But I talk about this in the piece. It's like the category of disinformation. It's like some of it refers to like state propaganda. Some of it refers to dangerous information about COVID. Some of it refers to scams, right? Scams are bad. Like that's why consumer protection should exist. But I don't think it's explicable through a framework about like the way humans see the world now. Humans have been trying to scam each other for a really long time, as far as I know. So anyway. I have to run and pick up my kid. Okay, well,
this is. I think this is a fine place to end it. So thanks for coming on and taking the time. So people should check out the article. The link will be below on Bloggy Heads. Harper's bad news is the headline in the online edition, or cover story. Harper's. I think. Like I said, parts I agree with, parts I disagree with. But this was an interesting conversation. Maybe people change their minds who watch or listen to this. I have no idea. Or maybe it was just something to do while you're, washing the dishes or something. And that's part of life also, I guess.
You have to wash the dishes.
Yeah. I mean, you got someone has to wash those dishes. Okay. So Joe, thanks again for taking the time. And if people want to, you're still at BuzzFeed, right? You just took like a sabbatical.
Yeah, I'm starting again on Tuesday. So. Okay,
cool. So, and your Twitter handle is
at Bernstein.
So you must have claimed that one early. So you're an early adopter. I'm at RACW, and people can rate and review and like and subscribe and tell their friends and make a zine about it or yell in the street corner or whatever. Okay, so thank you, Joe, and thanks to our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.